Check. 1, 2, 3.
The D. Brief. This is the D Brief.
Your guide to Detroit.
Your guide to Detroit's
arts and entertainment scene.
This is the D
Brief.
Hello and welcome to the Debrief. I'm your co-host. My name is Seth Resler.
And I'm Becky Scarcello.
All right, Becky, let's do something different than what we normally do here. Normally, this is a podcast that's all about the Detroit arts and entertainment scene, and we're talking about music, or we're talking about food and drink, or comedy, or theater, or whatever it is. We're not going to do that in this episode. And don't worry, we will get right back to that, I promise, in our next episode. But we wanted to take an episode and talk about something that we don't talk a lot about, which is podcasting. And the art of podcasting, because we have now been doing this podcast for over a year, for over 100 episodes, and we have had tons of guests on this show from different arts and entertainment organizations all around the city of Detroit. And they've all said the same thing to us at the end of every appearance, right?
I think I should do a podcast, but I'm not sure how.
Right, and we've heard that over and over again.
Yeah.
So much that you and I said, we should start
right.
a business here to help Detroit arts and entertainment organizations launch their own podcasts. So that's what we're doing. It's called Michigan Podcast Productions. You can find a website that'll tell you all about it at michiganpodcastproductions.com. We've also started a blog where we're writing about the art of podcasting, especially as it applies to Michigan.
Creatives.
Yeah, exactly. People who are doing that kind of stuff. But we wanted to take this episode and actually answer some questions about podcasting and talk a little bit about the art form. We're always, people may not know this. You're the person who comes to this podcast with a ton of knowledge about Detroit. You grew up here. You know everything there is. You're incredibly well connected in the city of Detroit. I'm not. I'm new. I'm still learning my way around, but I've been podcasting for 8 years. And actually, I go and fly, especially in the summer, fly all over the country and talk about podcasting and teach other people how to podcast. And so for once, I think we should be talking about my specialty.
We should. And you're always the one sitting in front of the board and producing all the pieces and doing the editing and all that stuff that you're right. It's a little behind the scenes and we don't highlight it enough.
So let's do that. So where do we start? What should we start with?
Well, I think let's start with a lot of the questions that we get asked. So number one, let's start from the beginning. Who even listens to podcasts?
That's a good question because not everybody does, right? There's new research just put out by Edison Research who says that about 144 million people have listened to a podcast. That's 51% of the population. And that's a big deal this year because it's the first time that a majority, granted slim majority.
Slim, but still, that's a lot of people.
A majority of people now say that they have listened to a podcast here in America. 32% of people listen monthly or more often. That's about 90 million people. But that still leaves, 2/3 of people that don't listen to a podcast. And believe it or not, one of the big factors is whether you are an iPhone owner or an Android phone owner.
And why is that?
Because if you own an iPhone, are you iPhone or are you Android?
I'm iPhone.
See, I'm Android, right? Your phone has an icon on it called podcast.
The nice little purple icon, yep.
Exactly. My phone doesn't have that, right? So if I want to listen to podcasts on my phone, I've got to go to the App Store. I've got to download a podcast listening app called a podcatcher, right? And then I can listen to podcasts. There's an extra step that I have to take that you don't. And believe it or not, that extra step makes a huge deal. About 5 times as many podcast downloads happen on Apple devices, iOS devices, as they do on Android devices. And so the thought is that the day that Android finally comes out and says, you know what, we've put a podcast app on every single phone, and there is an icon on your home screen from the moment you unbox the phone, just like there is on iPhones, that podcast listening is just going to explode. Until then,
that was something that I really learned.
Move up every
just
single year.
Personal experience. I heard all these people talking about podcasts years ago, and there's just that tiny bit of task that you have to do to enter that space, and that can be a real hurdle. Until someone said, "Oh, well, it's that purple thing on your iPhone. It's that little purple app." Oh, okay. Then you open it up and start searching and realize. So it's simple, but a lot of people feel silly at this point, and they shouldn't.
No, you absolutely shouldn't. And I think that there's more awareness of podcasting than there's ever been before. I think
agree.
Serial was one of those things where all of a sudden podcasting got a lot of exposure, and journalists were writing about it several years ago, and then you had Saturday Night Live making fun of it and Sesame Street making fun of it. Now Ron Burgundy's got a podcast.
Right.
He's not even a real person. So you are seeing an explosion of awareness about podcasting. But yeah, there is that extra step. There's a lot of people in the podcasting space, including myself, who really think that the thing that makes it go through the roof is actually not going to be a piece of content, but a technical change, which is that when every Android phone ships with a podcast app already installed and that icon right there on the home screen so that everybody can see it, just like the iPhones, that then all of a sudden podcasting is going to be super easy for everybody. Apple produces all its phones, so it can control what's on the home screen. Google does not produce, you've got Samsung and LG and these other manufacturers, and it's like herding cats trying to figure out what goes on the home screen.
Yeah.
So it's a little more difficult there. The other thing that's going to change is smart speakers. It's not a perfect experience calling up a podcast on a smart speaker like Amazon Alexa or Google Home yet. And then car dashboards, because if you look at the cars that are coming off the assembly line now, it's a computer in the center of that dashboard. It's not a radio like it used to be. And that's going to make it easier to pull up podcasts.
Yeah. So the point of all this is that it's getting easier by the day to listen to podcasts, and that will continue. So the growth is going to happen.
Yeah. Now, what this also means is that podcasting is a great communication tool for certain types of organizations or certain types of people. And basically, if you already have a fan base, right? You already have customers, or you already have clients, or you already have people who are passionate about what you do, podcasting is a great way to communicate with those people.
So a natural fit, people that have fans are often arts and entertainment organizations. So why should these organizations be podcasting? Yeah,
that's a great question. And I think that's why we launched this, and what's really at the center of it is that if you are an organization, if you're a museum, if you're a theater, if you're a restaurant, you are a place that people are really passionate about, but they don't encounter you every day or even every week or even every month, right? I mean, how often do you go to your favorite restaurant? Maybe a couple times a year.
Right.
How often do you go to a great museum? Maybe once a year, right? So these are organizations that people are passionate about, but they don't encounter their fans on a regular basis. And so for those organizations to stay at the top of their fans' minds, podcasting is a great way to do that. And one of the reasons why podcasting is so powerful is because audio as a medium is really good at being intimate. Mm-hmm. It is really good at nurturing that sort of emotional connection in a way that just reading pages in a blog doesn't do. I really think that audio, how often do you think about when you listen to your favorite radio morning show as a kid? And you felt like you knew those people.
Oh, definitely. And that they were speaking to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I love audio, too, because you can be doing other things.
Right.
There's so much sound and distraction in life, but you can be listening to a podcast while you're making breakfast, while you're driving to work, while you're, preparing stuff for your family or cleaning the house or, whatever you're doing, you can multitask with it.
Yeah. And that's what makes it such a great way for, these organizations that really do have passionate fans to stay connected to them, to deepen that relationship.
I liken it to when you go to a museum, there's such a big difference between walking around on your own versus having, say, an audio tour guide. And so if you love a museum, you'd be interested in, hey, where did the curators come from? How did they come up with the exhibits? What artists are in the exhibits? What's their backstory? That kind of inside scoop. It just makes the whole thing richer and more engaging.
Yeah, I think you're right. Now, I want to make it clear. There are some organizations that this medium doesn't make sense for. If you are a brand new Detroit t-shirt company and you just launched yesterday and your t-shirt is Detroit, it's wonderful, whatever slogan you want to put on a t-shirt, podcasting's not right for you.
No.
You need to have a fan base. It's actually kind of like Kickstarter in that way. Kickstarter is a great way to monetize a fan base that you already have.
Correct.
But it's not a good place to build a new fan base for the first time. Same thing with podcasting.
It's
a
hard
great
to
way.
find just a random podcast. So.
Right. But if you are a theater, and you do multiple shows throughout the season, like you said, those behind the scenes conversations, how did this come together? If you're a restaurant, if you're a stand-up comedian, if you're a band or a concert venue, I think all these places are perfect for podcasts. And that's why we really wanted to focus on Detroit arts and entertainment organizations.
Creative venues, yeah. So if someone's coming to us, how do they figure out what kind of podcast that their particular organization or group should do?
Yeah, so that's something that we sit down and we will help you with that process and sort of talk you through it and identify your goals and help you formulate what would be the best type of show. One piece of advice that I often give people when they're thinking about launching their first podcast. I remember when I launched my first podcast, which was 8 years ago, and I had this idea in my head that it was going to be like The Tonight Show or like 60 Minutes or, The Today Show, where I was going to do an episode every week from now until the day I died. And if I didn't, I was a failure. And my first podcast series, I think, lasted 13 episodes. And frankly, I was discouraged by it. But of course, I've gone on to do a lot more podcasting since then. And I learned, and all that experience that I gained, I learned and I used. So now when we sit down and talk to clients, we talk about creating a pilot season and thinking of yourself not as a movie, but as a movie studio, where movie studios put out multiple movies throughout the years. And the expectation is that some of them will be successes and some of them won't. And it's okay if some of them won't. Same thing with a podcast. Sit down and say, we're going to launch a pilot season. We're going to do 10 episodes. And we're going to see if it works. And if it's a huge hit, we'll come back for season number 2. And if it's a dismal failure, we'll scrap it and go on to something else. And the truth is, it's probably going to be somewhere in the middle. So by committing to 10 episodes, it gives you sort of a natural stopping point to pause, reflect, see what's working, tweak what's not, pivot where necessary, and then come back. So that's the first thing, is think of yourself as a studio, do a pilot season. I think the second thing is to think about what is a feasible production schedule, right? The easiest type of podcast is basically two people talking like you and I are now, right? Get two people in a room, put mics in front of them. That's easy.
Done.
On the complicated end of the scale is something like This American Life, hosted by Ira Glass, where it's storytelling journalism, and they go out and they get B-roll audio, and it's scripted, and there's, storyboarded and fact check and all that kind of stuff. Or a game show like Wait, Don't Tell Me that they put out on public radio, things like that. And those can be done. They're just more complicated. So I think it's about thinking, they're also more expensive because they're more complicated. So it's about thinking what makes most sense for what we're trying to do and what we're trying to achieve. And so we help you out with that process and thinking about that.
Now, one question we get all the time is, where do I even start? What kind of equipment do I need to use? And how much does it cost?
Yeah. So start by coming up with a show concept and figuring out who's going to do it. Who's going to host it, and go find somebody who's passionate about it and who's really into it. And then the equipment will really be a lot about the type of show that you're going to do. Like I said, the one-on-one interview is pretty easy, and we're fortunate. I came up in the radio industry, spent 20 years working in the broadcasting industry, and the amount of equipment that you needed was expensive. It couldn't be moved easily. Like when we had to go out and do a remote broadcast, we had to take a whole van full of stuff with us. You don't need that anymore. I mean, I go out all the time, and we record at CES in Las Vegas or at the Worldwide Radio Summit, and everything I need fits into a backpack, and we're using a small digital audio recorder, a couple of mics. The equipment is not particularly expensive, and then you can get into higher end stuff. So once we figure out what kind of podcast you want to do and what the format is, then we sit there and go, okay, what's the equipment we need to achieve what we're trying to do here?
Really tailor it to the needs of the show. Yeah. So what about beyond there? Okay, you've recorded, you've produced a show. How do you get it onto iTunes, onto Spotify, and all those other types of places that it can be accessed?
Yeah, and this is what we're going to do for you. And that's really what we specialize in. Keep in mind, the number one place your podcast needs to be is in iTunes, which also gets it into Apple Podcasts, right? You're talking about approximately 60% of all podcast downloads are happening through iTunes and Apple Podcasts. Number 2 is Spotify, with in the neighborhood of 9% of downloads. It is a distant number 2, and there really isn't a number 3 at this point, right? So, but we will also get you into places like TuneIn and like iHeart. Pandora, as we're recording this, just opened up to starting allowing podcast submissions. They're not publishing everything yet, but we'll help you get your podcast
Navigate
into all the places that you need to be in. Basically, what you need to know is that there's 2 types of companies. There's your hosting company, which is where your audio files live. And then there's the directories, which are where other people go to get your files. The easiest way to think about this is with a website, you've got a hosting company, right? You got something like GoDaddy, right? And that's where you upload your files to. But nobody goes to GoDaddy, right? They open up Chrome, or they open up, Firefox, or they open up Safari, and they access your website that way. Same thing. You might use a host like Libsyn or Blueberry or Spreaker or some other host, but people are going to use Apple Podcast to get to your, or Stitcher or iHeart Radio to access your podcast.
Yeah, and the good thing about you is you live and breathe this every day.
I've done it so many times I can do it in my sleep at this point.
Not just with the debrief, but so many other things. And you do this as part of your day job and keep up on all the current technology.
Yeah.
And that's a big job.
I love this stuff. I mean, this is fun for me. I've been a radio broadcaster for over 20 years. I've been a podcaster for over 8. I love the creativity that comes with it. I love sitting down and coming up with new ideas for new shows. So, yeah.
Okay, so someone comes to us. They've learned all these things you've talked about, recorded a show. They have their pilot season. They get it in iTunes, etc. Then how do you get people to listen to it? How do you market it?
Yeah, that is tough, and the reason why we only work with certain types of organizations, this is why I said earlier, if you just launched a t-shirt company yesterday, we're not, podcasts are not right for you, because there are so many people out there who don't listen to podcasts. So you really do have to have a fan base already. You are a prime candidate if you are an organization that has an email list with a lot of people on it. If you have a strong social media following. If you have a lot of foot traffic through your venue. If you have a mobile app that a lot of people have downloaded. If you have those things, we can show you how to leverage those channels to listen to a podcast. If you don't, podcasting probably isn't the right medium.
Right. You have to look at it as a part of your marketing strategy, as a part of your connection to.
Yeah, and we are specifically not trying to work with people who just want to become a next superstar and going, oh, I can launch a podcast and become an overnight sensation. That's not what we're about.
Right.
Like you said, it's for organizations that have another product, another service that may be their main revenue driver, and this is a marketing channel for them.
And that they have a lot of avenues in which to show that they also have a podcast. Like you said, foot traffic. So you can have it on your signage, on your cards. If you're a theater, you could run it when, as a video before someone comes on stage. Those types of things. Yeah,
we see it all the time. And I've seen it with other people that I've worked with that, in order to get people to download your podcast, you have to have people that you can tell that you have a podcast.
Exactly.
Right. And so,
have your thousands of Facebook followers or whatever, so they can see, oh, here's a new thing that they're doing, this place that I already like. And
I think it's important that we're transparent here and that we talk about who this is going to work for and who this is not. And this is, there are some people that it's not. But there are some people that it's going to be very successful for.
Exactly.
And so as long as we're working with the right people, I think it could be very fruitful.
And taking out a lot of the hurdles to it, where really our customer is going to have all the content and all the things that they want to talk about and the people they're going to interview, but we can take care of all that other stuff that you don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, no, so that's what we're here for. And we can help with things like artwork. We can help with things like production elements, so a little produced intro and a little produced outro at the end of it. We'll help people develop what I like to call benchmark features. A benchmark feature is something that's recognizable in every show. In the debrief, for example, we have rapid fire recommendations where we will ask people at the end of the interview, for recommendations for their favorite restaurants or cocktail bars or things like that around town. Another one to think about is David Letterman for many years had the top 10 list.
Yes.
That was his benchmark feature. If you've ever watched Inside the Actors Studio with James Lipton, he asked the same series of questions at the end of every interview. If you've ever listened to Mojo in the Morning has his second date update, right? That's his benchmark feature. Those are great things that help build familiarity, and so will help your podcast develop those types of things. And so we can really help you package it and put it all together and come out with a professional sounding
we've
show.
already thought of the things that you didn't even know to think about.
Right, because we've done this.
Yes.
We've done this a lot.
Right, and we've learned a lot. And
Yes.
We would like to now share the love of the experience.
So that's what it's all about. If you have any other questions about podcasting, please contact us. I love talking about this. I love this art form. It's a lot of fun to me.
You've taught me a ton.
And it's fun to do, right?
It is.
But admit it, it's not easy.
It is not easy, and to the point of just I didn't even know what to ask in the beginning. I really didn't. And then one thing leads to another. But it's always good with whatever work you're doing to have somebody that's experienced and can help lay the framework for you. Heck, we can even host it for you if you need a host.
We'll take care of all of it for you. So that's what we're here for. That's what it's all about. It really was because we were hearing this question over and over so much.
Over and over, yes.
So if you want more information, go to the website. It's MichiganPodcastProductions.com. Again, that's MichiganPodcastProductions.com. Go check it out. And if you've got any questions or you want to talk about it further, just drop us a line.
The Debrief.
Your guide to Detroit's arts and entertainment scene.